Welcome to the College of Complexes. This is our 472nd meeting since we started in February 2009. We put a speaker on every week, a different subject. We require a speaker to take a position on an issue or express a point of view. They have to be for or against something. We don't care what it is. We give them an hour to make a presentation. If they go over an hour, we cut them off. If anybody interrupts the speaker, we remind the interrupter. We listen only one fool at a time. It's one of our rules. Then we have questions and answers from the audience of the speaker, not speeches. Then we have remarks, rebuttals. Everyone in this audience that wants to gets 5 minutes at the podium here to respond to the speaker said, either for or against. And our speaker gets the last word, gets a comment, and a comment closes the meeting. That's how it works. Before we introduce our speaker, we have time for announcements. Anybody have any announcements? Now's the time to do it. I think you come on up here.
Do I come up there or can I do it from here?
Come on up here.
Okay.
They're making a recording of it.
Make a recording of it.
Oh, awesome. Well, good evening. It's nice to see all these lovely faces. Some of them, I know a few of you guys, but most of you guys are new. So I'm very looking forward to meeting all of you. My name is Hexel Colorado. I am the director of the local Dallas Yang Gang, and we are the grassroots movement supporting Andrew Yang for president in 2020. And so, yes, and so you've probably seen him on the debate stage the previous 2 times, and he'll be on the debate stage again this September in Houston. And if you know anything about Andrew Yang, you probably know him as the Asian man who's running for president who wants to give everybody $1,000 a month. And that's true. But what you may or may not know is it's not a gimmick. This is not something that we just came up with, one day to buy votes. This is something that is a deeply American concept. It was written about by Martin Luther King in the book before he died, Where Do We Go From Here? Thomas Paine wrote about it and he called it the Citizens Dividend. And Milton Friedman and 1,000 economists wrote a paper saying this was a good idea. And even most recently, people like Obama himself and Elon Musk have said that this is going to be essential as we go into the next 12 years and jobs are displaced by automation, AI, and new technology. And so, I don't have it today, but if you ever come to our Yang Gang meetups, you'll see the people with the math hats. If you guys didn't know, math actually stands for something. It stands for Make America Think Harder. Because we're trying to turn the clock forward. Donald Trump wants to turn the clock back. So we have to apply new solutions and new ideas to face the new century. And so the one thing I just want to let you guys know is that we actually have a big presence here in DFW. We have a weekly meetup every Saturday morning at 10 a.m. at La La Land Kind Cafe. We're also, yes, it's lovely. I could spend a whole another hour just talking about how awesome those guys are.
Well, tell them who works there.
Yeah, so the people who work there, I know this is now a tangent because, but that place, they started this year in Dallas, and they hire foster kids who aged out of the system, and they pay them a living wage. And that's why I brought my gang meeting there, because that's a value that we love. And so that's where you'll find us every single Saturday morning at 10 a.m. that La La Land Kind Cafe. And we're also online, so you can find us at our website, DallasYangGang.com. And we're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, so you can find us as DFW for Yang. So DFW for the word for Yang. We're on all social media. You can Google us. Anything you find on that first page of Google, that's going to be us. So if you have any questions, I'll be sitting in the back there. I have brochures with my contact information, and you're more than welcome to ask me any of your hard-hitting questions. So any question you've got, if you think it's really tough, I'm the person to ask. So that's all I have for now. Thank you so much, and I'll see you later.
Any other announcements? Now's the time. Anyone else have announcements they want to make? Anyone else have an announcement they want to make? No? Well?
It's on lower things.
Ross and Ringo will teach.
Our speaker next week is Carol Donovan. She's the chair of the Dallas County Democratic Party. She's going to discuss, she's going to talk about how long can he go.
Is that next week or do we have a...
No, not next week. Obviously, next week we're closed. It's Labor Day weekend. We won't have a meeting. We've we used to have meetings on Labor Day, but the problem is the crowd is not what it should be. So it's kind of a losing proposition. Anyway, we give them the benefit of the doubt. Hope they'll show up the following week. Anyway, September 7th, how low can he go? He's talking about Trump. That's Carol Donovan, chair of the Democratic Dallas County Democratic Party. She'll be our speaker. That ought to be good. And September 14th is Brain Health and American Medical Crisis. That's Dr. Dan Hurley. He'll be talking about that. It's on your itinerary here. I'm not going to read all this. And September 21st on the battle with the IRS, Ken Sauter. He's going to talk about that. He had a battle with the IRS. That might be interesting. Anyway, you'll hear about it. That's on the itinerary. September 28th is not on here, but John Beasley will be our speaker. I forget, what is it, John, you're talking about?
It's called America, What Went Wrong.
Okay, America, What Went Wrong. He'll be talking on September 28th. So, anyway, our speaker tonight is Gene Lantz. He's a communications director for the Dallas AFL-CIO. He's going to talk about solving the crisis in America today. He's also a host of the Workers' Beat on KNON FM radio. He will argue that the crisis in America today can only be solved by unity among working families. And further, unity will only be achieved around the needs of the neediest of working families. He further contends that while the 2020 election are critical, they're only part of the picture. So without further ado, please give a very, very warm welcome to Gene Lantz.
I was some under restrained zen now while this goes on.
That's not possible.
That's true, it's not possible. Well, I've been going around for the last 2 weeks telling people I'm going to be speaking at the College of Complexes, and
I'm just turning this. Give me more light.
I'm going to be speaking. Oh, I don't need it.
Can you, if you don't need it, why don't we turn it off, because it's in the camera.
We need a
There we go.
Yeah, that's
Can you
good.
still see?
Yeah, sort of. I've been going around saying that I was going to talk about the global crisis and that I understood it, and that furthermore that I knew what to do about it. So everybody that I've told that, I then followed up by saying, you know, I've got 2 weeks to figure this out, you know, or I've got 4 more hours. When I saw Michelle this afternoon, I said, well, I've got 2 more hours, Michelle. Because it's a big deal. And it's really arrogant to say, I understand the global crisis. So really what I'm going to try to do is get a discussion going with the thesis that there is a crisis. One could think of it as a crisis of the economy, or a crisis of democracy, or a crisis of war and peace, or a crisis of the environment, and that all of those are going on. Now, I'm just curious what you already think. So, if you don't want your opinion to be known, or if you don't have an opinion, don't raise your hand. But if you do think that there is an economic crisis in the world today, raise your hand. I want to know. So it's most of us that think that. Okay. If you do think that there is a crisis of democracy in the world today, raise your hand. And if you want to. And most of us do, and most of us agree on that. Okay. What about a crisis of war and peace? People agree on that too. What about a crisis of the environment? We've got to all agree on that one. Yeah. Okay, so I guess that's all I had to say. Really, because you're already convinced. But the things, I did this on the radio show this morning. I started off by saying, you know, I'm going to explain the global crisis and I'm going to tell people what to do about it. And then I asked people, you know, to call in and say if they think so or not. They all agreed. Everyone that called said there is a global crisis. But they were quite different in what they think is the root cause of it. The first caller of all said it was caused by the anti-American Democrats.
No.
The Democratic Party is anti-American and it caused everything. And then he just hung up. He didn't even give me a chance to talk to him further. 3 callers said it was God. One of them said that Mr. Trump is president because God has willed it and is backing Mr. Trump. The next one on that topic called and said, God put Trump in office, all right, but it's only to teach us a lesson. And then the last one, never get to finish what she was saying because we ran out of time. I think she was going to say, God did it, but heaven knows why. You know, it is not up to us to question the motives of God. So I think she was going to say that nobody knows why he did it, or he or she. But anyway, they say that it was God. 2 guys called in and identified themselves as atheists. They just threw that in, and they said basically that it was Mr. Trump. And I think a lot of people feel that it is Mr. Trump. I'm going to say, and I said it on the radio this morning, that it's not Mr. Trump. That's not the basic cause for the crisis. And I'm hoping I say something of some kind of controversy or some kind of push the boundaries of what we think of substance. See, I told you to restrain him. Carolyn, you're over there. You're kidding or something. I hope so anyway, because otherwise we'd just be talking to the choir, you know, preaching to the choir. Just on the economy. The national debt has topped $22 trillion. I'm getting this from the morning news. This is not some obscure publication. I'm getting it from, have you read the paper?
It's getting more obscure every day.
It's getting more obscure. But the national debt tops $22 trillion. The budget deficit for this year is expected to approach $1 trillion. And the budget deficit for next year will go over $1 trillion. That's the seriousness of the economic situation that we're in. Furthermore, in the last big crisis, when Obama first got elected and they were in a terrible crisis, the first thing he did was try to round up some support around the world. You know, it was dealt with as a world problem, and he tried to get, you know, participation from the rest of the world. That is not happening now. That is not very likely. The G7 is going on right now, and I think the word that the Dallas Morning News used to describe the prospects, the word was bleak. The prospect of cooperation just in the G7, and that doesn't include China. It's just the former world's greatest imperialist nations. Japan, Canada, United States, and European nations. And they are not expected to agree on much. And they didn't get off on a very good start with the trade war going on. So not only is the economy in terrible trouble, but the means of solving a problem are much less accessible than they were before. For example, usually when we see a recession coming, the Federal Reserve cuts interest rates. But they have been cutting interest rates most of the time since 2008, so they don't really have a lot of room to mess around with the rates. So there's not a lot of tools to deal with the economy. The world's growth rates are falling. And I read one thing that said Germany was already in recession, and then another one thing that said it was almost in recession. But anyway, the international situation, the economies of our friends looks worse than ours. And I think that's the reason why we're seeing the stock market jump up and down like it has been recently. It lost yesterday, I think, 2.4%. And we were trying to figure out how much dollars that was a while ago. We think it's around $600 billion disappeared yesterday. So the stock market, of course, is not the same thing as the economy, but it is a leading indicator. Another leading indicator is the yields on bonds. In other words, what the cost of borrowing. And last week, they had the phenomenon came about that you couldn't get a better deal on bonds by buying long-term bonds as short-term bonds. And you can think of this, it's easier for me to understand as CDs. If you were trying to get a CD for a 1 year, you might get a certain percent on your CD. But if you were trying to get one for 10 years or 5 years, you could get a much bigger interest rate, right? Well, the strange thing, and the same thing is true of bonds. If you get the 10-year bond, you're supposed to get a much nicer interest rate on it, but it's not true. They actually, it's the same for a 1-year bond as it is for a 10-year bond, and they're calling that the inverted something.
Inversion. Bond inversion.
Okay, and so this precedes recessions, and they say it has preceded every recession since such and such. So it's a bad sign. So the economy is certainly in crisis in global terms. I talk about inequality everywhere I go because it's unsustainable. I know you hear these numbers all the time. I mean, Bernie Sanders brings it up every time he talks. I think he says 3 billionaires now have as much as 40% of the poorest people, something like that. And I have a number of those statistics like that. The Federal Reserve reported that the top 1% owned 40% of the country's wealth. The top 10% of the world has more than 70% of the combined total wealth of China, Europe, and the United States. The bottom 50% owns 2% of the wealth, and the middle 40% owns less than 30% of the wealth. So inequality is bad, very, very, very bad, and getting much worse. And it's unsustainable. You can't just push people off the edge of the economy, not if you expect them to come to work the next morning. Alice Walton has $46 billion. She lives here. Alice Walton has $46 billion. You don't. And yesterday, David Koch died. Koch died, and his estate was worth 50 point something billion. He and his brother were tied for 11th place as among the richest Americans. We had this protest, and the reason I put this sign here is because this is a very good coalition that's been built around these guys that do the catering for American Airlines. A number of us that are in this room were at a big demonstration Tuesday a week ago, and they have put together a really good coalition, but they're trying to get $15 an hour. And the CEO of American Airlines, it was announced from the podium, makes $6,000 an hour. That's unsustainable. We're not going to be able to do that. We also have the rise of the gig economy. This is people that don't really have a job. Just every day they go and see if they have a job. And they see if they're going to work that day, and they see how long they're going to be able to work that day. Because they're considered contract employees. All of these Uber drivers, for example, are in the gig economy, and more jobs are falling into that category. It's growing like crazy, and it's a very, very bad thing. You can't organize them. They don't have any insurance or any kind of benefits. And I talked about inverted yields. The rising price of gold. I don't have any numbers on that, but I understand that gold has gone up considerably. And that's what happens when investors are afraid to put their money in stocks. Gold tends to go up when there's a panic underway. Now, on the subject of peace and justice, this is what the morning news said about the G7. Volatility is occurring as Trump largely dismisses international alliances and cooperation in favor of his America First policies, creating a vacuum in global leadership. Quote, the whole idea of world order is something that these countries think a lot about and are quite preoccupied with, and they're worried about how to sustain it without American leadership for world order, said John Alterman, a global security expert at such Center. And he says in principle that these people, especially because the Chinese are not among them, these people should really be getting along. They should be looking for ways to get along, and they're not. Some of the Europeans are still looking for ways to get along, but some of them are not. Most notably, recently, the Italians, the Austrians, and certainly the United States, since Mr. Trump got elected. I call these countries me first. You know, it's America first, or Brazil first, or Italy first, and they have those slogans, but they are not interested in global cooperation. They are interested in getting what they can get with their country first, and that's the kind of attitude that leads toward war. Everybody laughed because Mr. Trump said he wanted to buy Greenland. And it was made a big joke of here in this country, but it was really a very, very serious thing. There is, everybody knows there's a big confrontation developing in the South China Sea. But think about it, there's also one in the Arctic Circle. There are now sea lanes open in the Arctic Circle that used to not be open. So there's commerce, and there are minerals that are accessible now that used to not be accessible. So the imperialist nations are very, very interested in getting a leg up in the Arctic Circle. So it's no joke that Mr. Trump wants to buy Greenland. And it's another sign of the countries trying to get ahead of each other. Former President Jimmy Carter said that the world is at a, quote, turning point in history, end quote, and governments must choose policies of peace and human rights over war and human suffering. I didn't even mention the war in Yemen. I didn't mention the fact that the United States still has occupation forces in 3 countries, and that Pakistan and India are at each other's throats. And they're both nuclear powers, too, by the way. So, moving on to the idea of a crisis of democracy. The reason for the economic crisis is what's causing the crisis of democracy. Because in order to rob people, you need to disarm them first. You don't really want to rob people that have got a pistol with them, you know, or a rifle or a grenade or something, or the right to vote, or any kind of democratic control over the economy. So taking people's democracy away from them is a fundamental part of the economic crisis. And in order to continue starving part of the population so that the other part of the population can get richer and richer, it's very important to make sure that the ones you're fixing to oppress don't have any rights. And so that's why we see voter suppression. That's why we see attempts to take people off the voter rolls. And we notice just in recent times the way big money has been legitimized to take over the electoral system in the Citizenship United Supreme Court decision. And we have even more recently seen the redistricting, what they call it, gerrymandering, legitimized. It is now okay. The courts have said that that redistricting for political purposes, for strictly political purposes, is perfectly all right. So we're seeing democracy being buffeted. And the reason, of course, as I said, is just the underlying economic crisis. The environmental crisis is easy to talk about. There were 2 articles just in the paper this week about how many billion tons of ice melted, especially in Greenland, and the disappearing what do you call those sheets of ice? Glaciers. And one of them had disappeared altogether, and they had a picture of these guys walking across the mud where the glacier used to be. And it said that all of their glaciers were losing ice. And they talked about how much water that was producing. It was enough to flood Pennsylvania to a depth of 1 foot. And that was just one of the casual things that was in the morning news about the environmental crisis. And of course, species are going extinct, and we don't really know what long-term effects it may have when one species dies, what it's going to have on other parts of the food chain, and particularly on ours. But there was a really good letter in the paper by someone named Ed Soff from Denton. Is Ed Soff here? S-O-P-H. He talked about Greenland's ice sheets, and he said it is about the future. He said economically, a 3.7 degree Fahrenheit warming will produce $551 trillion in damages. He says the total worldwide wealth today is only about half of that, 280 trillion. If we continue our current ice melting, mining, transport, and combustion of fossil fuels, the planet will warm over 4 degrees. Flood damage will increase 160% to 240% with a 2.7 degrees of warming. And 3.6 degrees will guarantee that flooding deaths will be 50% higher than today. Mr. Soft goes on, this will be the end of the planet, of a secure and safe and civilized life for our children and grandchildren and beyond. That was a letter to the editor. I don't know if he had all of his numbers right or not. It's very, very important to stress that in each of these crises, a worldwide cooperative response is necessary, and that is getting less and less likely. And Mr. Trump is the one I think that we blame the most for that, but it's true of, what's the guy's name in Italy one of them is just, he was bad enough, but he's stepping down because somebody even further to the right is taking over. And the guy in Brazil is an outright fascist. And he campaigned on the idea that he was going to let them burn the rainforest. And now the rainforest is burning, and he's saying, well, it's somebody else's fault. But the rainforest in Brazil is also called the lungs of the planet. And it's on fire. So we need this cooperation, and we are less and less likely to have it. Now, who's to blame? I think there's a lot of finger pointing going on. The Democrats say the Republicans, and the Republicans say the Democrats. A lot of people say Mr. Trump. They used to blame these things on sunspots. When they first realized that, that economies went up and down, some guy counted sunspots, and he said that when there's more sunspots, then we have more crop failures. Or it may have been fewer sunspots, more crop failures, I don't remember. But anyway, he blamed it on sunspots. And the people who called my radio show this morning, I think several of them would agree that the problem is moral decay. People have moved away from God, they have not gone to Sunday school enough, and God is out to get us for this. So I think that is the laziest excuse that there is, because it means you don't really have to do anything, doesn't it? God's will. So let it go. Whether you believe in God or not, you cannot afford to sit around and wait for the destruction of the world. A lot of people blame Mr. Trump, and I think Mr. Trump falls under the heading of a few bad apples. Like when somebody comes up with statistics that says the police shot so many white policemen shot so many black people. Well, they were just a few bad apples. We had a few bad apples, and these statistics don't mean anything because there's just an awful lot of bad apples. And Mr. Trump, I would agree, is a bad apple. But I don't think that's the problem. I think it's the system. that we live under. The crisis comes about because the wealthy are running the governments in their own interests. And this is not new. It's always been like that, even before capitalism. The wealthy were in charge as long as there's been some wealth to steal. It has been concentrated in the hands of a minority, and that minority has always been able to run things. They've always been able to hire the police and to hire the soldiers or the coercive ability of the state. So I would like to mention that there have been periods in the world history in which things were not so bad for certain people. Beginning with what they call Pax Romana. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. From a little bit before the birth of Christ until about 180 AD. If you were a Roman, things were really pretty good. If you were one of the countries they were enslaving, it wasn't so great. But for the Romans, they had 200 years there when things were really just not that bad for them. Then 100 years between 1814 and 1914, we had Pax Britannia, where things were pretty good if you were an English person. Or an English man, I guess you should say, because I don't know how good it was for the English women. But for English men, it was pretty good 100 years. And then we had Pax Americana. And I don't know if we would say that is over, or if we are just in the throes of ending it now. But certainly it's not going on. It's not going to go forward. Pax Americana was a really good time if you happened to be an American. Wasn't so great if you were, for example, a Vietnamese or something else. But if you were an American, it was pretty good from 1945 to the 1970s, or even up to today, depending on how you figure it. So those were periods of relative peace for certain people and relative prosperity for certain people. None of those periods were like the last period, because in Pax Romana and Pax Britannia, nobody had the ability to destroy the world. They could do some terrible bad things, but they didn't have the ability to destroy life on the planet. And we do have that now. So Pax Americana has been tremendously important. When American industry dominated the economy, the American military dominated the world's military forces, American ideals and culture dominated even the schools. They used to copy our schools. When I first began studying education, they would say that there were people, over here from all different nations trying to learn how to do schools as well as they do them in the United States. That's gone by, but there was a pretty total domination of the world by the United States after 1945 and on up until possibly even today. That's over.
No, it's not so.
Rebuttal later.
Rebuttal. Questions?
I didn't even hear what he said.
That's okay.
It's not over? Not over. Okay. Well, what's the answer? The answer, the problem is that a small number of people who control the wealth also control the armies, the coercive forces, the armies and police. In other words, the government. But the part of the government that I'm talking about are the police and the army. So the solution is obvious. The solution is democracy. The solution is for more people to have more say-so instead of having fewer people having ultimate say-so. And that's what the fight is all about, is to become more and more democratic. Now, I want to emphasize that since I'm saying that this small minority must be taken out of power, I am not saying that you should get a gun and go form an army. You would never win. You would never win. They've got too many guns and too many armies and too many bombs and too many. Is it X-35? Those planes they build in Fort Worth that cost $1 billion each. They've got too many of those, and they don't have a chance. Now, people think that there are two ways to establish a democratic control. One of them is to get everybody to vote. I certainly am for that. I just don't think that ultimately that it will work, not by itself. What does work and what is proven to work is not working. I didn't mean it for it to come out like that. But I mean striking. I mean going on strike or going on slowdowns or controlling the economy through not showing up for work. And I don't think I'm talking out of my hat on that, because at the end of July they did it in Puerto Rico. That's not what they showed on TV. What they showed on TV is that people demonstrated. And since people demonstrated through some magical process, the government caved in. But it wasn't magic. When they were demonstrating, they weren't working. There was a general strike in Puerto Rico. And in that general strike, they got the government to cave in to their wishes. If we could get people together, and take a blue flu day for the entire nation, we could have anything we wanted. However, we can't. We're not that well organized. I don't even think, even if we, through some magic, were able to transform this government into a completely democratic democratic government where people had a say-so on everything, I don't think we're ready for that. I don't think we could govern ourselves. We can't even get 53% of the people that are registered to vote to go vote. We can't even get all of the people that are eligible to be registered. We can't even get how many of the eligible are actually registered? Do you know, Linda?
50%.
70%, isn't it?
50% is registered.
70?
50.
50. Only 50% of the people that are over 18 and don't have a felony conviction hanging over their heads. Only 50% of them are actually registered. So we have to get from there to here. We have to get to the point where we could govern ourselves and where we are able to govern ourselves by removing the people that are in power, or removing them from their power. Now, I said I would tell you the solution, and I don't mean for it to be abstractions. It's not just a matter of saying solidarity or saying get organized. It's a matter of what do you do? What's your part? What's my part? What do we do as individuals? Certainly, we have to get organized into larger units, because if anybody thinks that they can win these battles as an individual or even as a member of a small group, they're just fooling themselves. That's a surefire way to lose, is to go up against this system as an individual or as a member of a small group. So what we have to do is organize larger and larger and larger groups. So what do you do as an individual? This is what you do. Is this on camera?
If you move your hand up a little bit there. Action, okay. There we go, we got it.
How about that? Is it now?
Let me darken the lens a little bit so we get more resolution. Okay,
Is that
put it back in front where you had it.
back here? Like that?
That'll work.
Okay. This is a little triangle. This is my model for what to do about everything, and in every occasion. If you imagine that inside the triangle that you have pixels, little white pixels, and those pixels represent the population that you're talking about. If you're talking about the population of this room, there'd be 30, 35 pixels in there. If you're talking about the population of Dallas, there'll be 1 million pixels, or the population of the world, however many billion that is. So whatever population you're talking about is a pixel inside this triangle. Your job is to move those pixels toward greater understanding this way and toward more action this way. So when you're talking to your daughter-in-law and you're asking her what should be done, and you're talking about the situation, try to figure out where they are and try to move them this way and this way. If a lot of people were up here with a great deal of understanding and a high level of activity, we would be getting what we want. We'd be winning. If we just allow people to languish down around in here, then and not even vote, or not even take action at all, not even study. So in a certain sense, what everybody should be doing is what you're doing. You're coming to meetings with other people, and you're participating in discussions with them, and you're getting up to the microphone from time to time to make your views known as well. And I hope you're thinking in terms of moving people toward better understanding and more action. That's really all there is to it. Thank you.
You get to sit there and ask questions.
Now, it's question and answer rounds. Everybody, when you get this thing from Tom, give it back to Tom. Don't give it to somebody else. Give it back to Tom, because otherwise, the same people will be getting it over and over.
I resemble that remark. Okay, with potential sea level rise, please explain to me, if you can, why the Obamas are now getting a oceanfront property, $15 million mansion in Martha's Vineyard, and why Al Gore still has several mansions right on the seacoast. If you have any thoughts on that.
You're a real pest,
No, I don't have any thoughts on it. I think Al Gore, of course, made a very good movie called Inconvenient Truth about certain seacoasts disappearing, and maybe it wasn't those seacoasts, John. I remember that Florida largely disappeared in Al Gore's movie, but I don't know what happened in Martha's Vineyard.
A rising tide lifts all ships. I mean, it should go with seacoast too.
Well, I don't know. Maybe their seacoast is on a higher bluff or something. I really have no idea.
Yeah, well, Martha's Vineyard is a high, so I'm sure the Obamas are fine. If not, they can escape in their yacht, which I'm sure they own, right? In any
Yeah,
case,
they've got their yacht. They've got their yacht there in case it goes
exactly. I mean, they're such treacherous individuals. In any case, I hope everyone understands that that was sarcasm on my part. So in any case, the question I have for Eugene is that based on the front of that poster, and you talked about the 40-hour day, 40-hour workday, or a full-time job work, a 40-hour workday, full-time job. Sorry. So my question is, I guess I was expecting you to be speaking more to, given your affiliations, with the unions and what have you, speaking more to bringing back more unionized labor, which, because we've obviously gone from 69% in the 70s or late 60s, whatever, down to 6% today.
I think
it's a single digit, isn't it?
The numbers that I know are that it was 35% in the early 1950s, and that it has dropped now to 11%. Michelle probably knows better than I do. You know?
I knew it was 35-ish at the highest, a third of the workforce, and yeah, it's around 10, 12.
I thought it had gone higher than that. But
it's around 11% today.
Yeah. But my question is, the understanding that you speak to and action taken as it relates to the subject of inequality, some form of unionized labor, and I put the word unionized in quotes, has to take place in order, on the action side of that graph. And the understanding is the general population as a whole understanding that people are entitled to earn a living wage to begin with, and in all likelihood the best route to that is to have unions that are truly there to represent the workers and not self-aggrandize the leaders of those unions and work cooperatively with corporations, and for corporations therefore to have a social conscience and understanding that the little guy is making the big guy wealthier in the first place. So I guess I don't know why that wasn't addressed more in your speak and description in your talk, which was very good, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So shall I answer?
Yep.
Why didn't I talk more about unions? Well, most of us are too old to join unions. And of the people that I see here that are young enough to be in unions, they are. But I have also come to the belief that people today are not as likely to organize by their workplace. The traditional kind of union organizing is by workplace. I think it's much more likely that they are going to organize by their communities, by their churches, by their belief systems. Geography is not the issue that it used to be. People used to live around the plants, and they would have community dances and things like that because they all lived right around the factory. But that's no longer true. They live everywhere, and that's bad in a way because it's harder to organize at the workplace. But it's easier to organize people that live in Mansfield because you've got them on Facebook, with you. I think that organizing today does not necessarily mean unions at workplaces.
No, I understand, but not every job. $15 should be the minimum, and not all jobs are $15 an hour jobs, or should be.
We certainly want that. This coalition that I talked about, there's here in this area, there's only 900 of these guys that work for Sky Chef and build the sandwiches for American Airlines. There's a guy way back in the back. But the coalition that we put together included people from, I don't know, most of the unions, many of the unions, but also Faith in Texas. Faith in Texas has a really good turnout now for progressive causes. They're church oriented. And they had a Catholic priest and a Greek priest and an evangelical priest, Protestant priest, Protestant preacher at this event. And I call that organizing, even though it's not organizing a union at a workplace. I think too many people, especially unions, are hung up on the idea of organizing workers in their workplace. Well, what are they going to do about the Uber drivers? They work all over the place. And if we're going to organize them, it's not going to be by organizing at a certain workplace. It's going to be some other kind of organizing. And I've seen some really fascinating new concepts for organizing. You know what a home, people who take care of old people, what do they call them? Homes, old people sitters, home something. Home what?
Home health workers.
Home health workers. In California, they organize those guys. And they don't even have an employer. They just work for this or that old couple, that need someone to live with them for a short time. They managed to organize them. And they did it by going to the agency that licenses them. And they protested at the agency and got the agency to give in until they were able to sign up all these home health care workers. And I rode on a bus with them to a farm worker action out in California. They were really good singers. There were some really good singers in the labor movement. But anyway, there's a guy in the back that had to think. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, there's a two questions I want to ask. The first one, what Democrat is doing for the voting system since Republican George Bush came to power in Texas. No statewide election Democrats ever won since George Bush came, since the Republican George Bush. The reason a lot of Democrats are not asking this question, the system have been rigged. Immediately the Republican came to power, they replaced the voting system. They wrote a software. Once you write a software, you can always win the election. People, the Democrats are not asking this question, they don't even realize. The reason George Bush Jr. get this information, get this knowledge from his father, because his father was former CIA chief. In all over the world, this is the way they used to rig election, by machine system. Democrats, they want to win a statewide election. They need to see the source code of that machine, of that the software. Other than that, they will be the same thing. They need to analyze it, why the Democrats are not winning statewide election. It's not the only this Texas they do it somewhere, I think it's Florida. Even one of them had fully admitted, but Democrats not pay attention to a lot of details, many things Republicans are doing. The second question,
I'm not absolutely clear what the first question is.
the
first question is why can't the Democrats win in Texas? Right?
what they're doing to solve the problem,
The source code.
why the Republican, why Democrat never win the statewide election. Statewide election.
Okay. They can't win in Texas, right?
They haven't.
Where there's something behind it.
His question kind of comes down to why aren't the Democrats interested in looking at the source code where the fraud is taking place?
Okay.
When they in 1990, when they installed machine, this machine, the MIT, one of the MIT professors, they told them they want to see the source code. They refused to release it. They say it's proprietary. Because there's no reason, if the whole population want to be following this machine, using this machine, we, every citizen, have a right to know the source code of this machine. Why the Democrats not doing anything about this thing?
My turn.
The second question is that, what? I know you can't answer, but we need to start taking.
You have to talk directly into the microphone.
Okay, sorry. Okay. I know that you can't answer this question right now. It's a thing the Democrats need to start looking into. Then the second question is that, why do we let Republicans to define Democrat when they call them socialism? When the Republicans call Democrat socialism, what did the Democrat call Republican? The reason, okay, the reason we need to define them. Socialism is that one day I went to one of my banks. I want to open since Trump get to power, I saw that the dollar would be collapsing soon. Then I went to my bank, I said, I want to put 200,000 in gold. Then my banker told me, said, oh, Donald Trump is doing good. He said, oh, Democrat socialism. I said, do you know the meaning of socialism? He doesn't know. I said, socialism is open. Socialism, did you go to school? Did you go to high school? Did you pay for school fees? He said, no, he didn't pay for school. I said, that's a socialism. Social system. I said, do you get social security? That's a social system. Do you get VA benefit? That's a social system. You see, the Democrats are not defining Republican very well. And also, when you say socialism, It means close-minded. When you say communism,
What's the question?
yeah, the question is that what Democrats are doing to counter this name they're giving them, socialism. What
Okay,
are
I think what you're
what
saying
Democrats
is,
doing?
are the Democrats doing anything to counteract being called socialism? I think
Well,
that's.
first of all, on
He started off saying.
as it said in the morning news, I think it was yesterday. As it said in the morning news yesterday, the Koch brothers set out to win state legislatures, statewide races in all of the more conservative states, and of course Texas is one of them. So I think one of the reasons for Republican success has been the Koch brothers. They spent more. The same article said that they spent as much money in 2016 as the Republican Party did. Just the Koch brothers. Well, it wasn't just them. They put together a group of other billionaires. Anyway, as to why the Democrats have not investigated things as thoroughly as you suggest, especially because they might discredit the whole system. In my opinion, the Democrats do not want to discredit the system. They simply want to take charge of it. That's why most of the candidates don't want to go for Medicare for all. Some of them do, but most of them don't. And that was because it would really rock the system. I don't think the Democratic Party in general wants to rock the system. I think that in general they were very happy with Mrs. Clinton as a candidate, and I think they are looking forward to getting Mr. Biden for their next one. Now, I'm not dealing with the second part of his question because I've already forgotten the second question.
That kind of was.
Well, that was part of the second question. I had a caller today. I had several callers that said Mr. Trump, just wanted to badmouth Mr. Trump. That's a popular thing to do. But one of the callers said, no, it's not his fault, it's Joe Biden's fault.
Oh, really?
And he said Joe Biden is no more than Hillary Clinton warmed over, and that if he gets the Democratic nomination, people will not vote again, and Mr. Trump will triumph. So he was blaming the whole thing on Mr. Biden. And as I told you earlier, the first caller blamed everything on the Democrats, so that they were un-American. So I think in general that the two-party system both parties agree that they really don't want a different system. They don't want to examine it, they don't want to condemn it, and they don't want to change it. Now, I hope I'm hitting on what you brought up. And in general, most people are not going to vote for this system. They're not going to turn out for more of the same. That's how Trump got elected. He said, vote for me, I'm different. And a lot of people said, yes, you are. They didn't know how different. But let's go on to the next question.
Yeah, what would you say about the inequality within the voting system per se? In other words, the Koch brothers' vote is different from the vote of the person who just shows up on election day and casts a vote, as opposed to, taking part in the system, taking part in the discussion, taking part in the process of picking a candidate, putting aside money to support the candidate, whereas the Koch brothers can, they can use their billions to just do all of that and just stay at home. What is the inequality within the voting system? What would you say about that?
Well, I think what you're saying is that hard-bitten Republicans are more likely to vote than hard-bitten Democrats, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
I think that in general, it's easier for wealthy people to vote. They have more time, and they have more cars, so they don't care if it rains, and they're very well educated. They go to Harvard, they go to Yale. They bribe the soccer coach, but they get in, and so I think that it's true that people who define themselves as Republicans tend to vote more than people who define themselves as Democrats. And I think it's because they have more money.
So we were talking about, one of the other questions was about the voting machines, right? And generally speaking, as it is now, I believe the states basically validate the machines and the counties buy them
Yeah.
out of the choices they get. Would it help to set national standards for those machines?
That's interesting. Well, I don't know specifically about voting machines, but you know, remember Molly Ivins when she was alive? We all loved her. She believed that electoral reform was what's going to save America. And I think a lot of people believe that. I think they believe that the elections are getting corrupt and getting more corrupt. Certainly the redistricting is, and the big money is getting more and more so that we can rely less and less on honesty in our elections. And I'm sure that applies to the voting machines as well as everything else. I think that fighting for electoral reform is a good thing, but I don't think that's what's going to change America. I believe that America has to have fundamental change. And I kind of go along with Lucy Parsons, who said, quote, "Never be fooled into believing that the wealthy are going to allow you to vote them out of power."
Ah, yeah.
Because they just change the rules, don't they? I think that the Citizens United decision and the decision to gut the Voting Rights Act and the decision to okay gerrymandering, those didn't just come from anywhere. They came from the fact that the American people are getting more and more ready to rise up. And so, as I told you, you have to disarm the people you're going to rob. And so they are. I'm sure this applies to voting machines as well as any number of aspects of our electoral system. We could talk all night just about the Electoral College and whether or not there's any democracy and all that. In my sci-fi books, people vote by internet. They all have a user number and they all vote by internet. They vote on everything. And all the government does is get proposals together. And they put these proposals out on the internet and everybody votes. Because they all have equal access and they all have a user number. Go ahead.
Okay, Gene, if your grandfather said he was the chosen one, and if your grandfather said he was God, would you take away his car keys?
Yes, I would. But nevertheless, I still think Mr. Trump is a symptom of the world collapse instead of being the cause of it. I mean, he's certainly making it worse every time he opens his mouth. But Mr. Trump doesn't explain Mr. Bolsonaro in Brazil, and doesn't explain what's happening in Italy. What explains what's happening? It doesn't explain Mr. Is it Johnson in England?
Boris.
You know he's a bad guy. Have you ever seen a movie where somebody named Boris was not a bad guy? But anyway, these guys are, it's not just Trump. The world order, Pax Americana, is either ended or coming to an end. And the ability of the world to cooperate is disappearing. I mean, it was really never there, but America used to be able to dominate so thoroughly that the Americans could say everything in the world is going on smoothly because we're just telling them what to do. And I think Mr. Obama he made a valiant attempt to keep that going. I think he really worked at trying to resolve the falling apart of the world order. And that's why I don't support any of the candidates in the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, including Mr. Sanders, because I learned this from Mr. Sanders. None of them can provide fundamental change. None of them can. Only Lauren can. And that's Lauren.
Excellent, I will be on the ballot.
No, because Lauren is an activist with our revolution. She's someone who believes that the movement can provide the change. And Mr. Bernie Sanders believes that. And so that's why I don't believe in any of the candidates, but I'm supporting Mr. Sanders because of Lauren, because of the movement that he says he's building.
I believe Andrew Yang can provide the change.
Are you the
Okay.
Yang Carl?
Some people,
And-
some people believe in like uniforms.
And the guy that was just up here believes that Mr. Yang can provide that change. A lot of people believe Elizabeth Warren can. And well, anyway, let's take the next question.
All right. Would you not say that socialism is rampant in this country? The only problem is it's socialism for the 0.01%.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so the old 1% is getting all the government handouts. Give the microphone to that guy in the back that keeps wanting to talk. One of the people who called this morning to the radio show, he agreed that it's a world crisis, and he said the answer is socialism and communism. But he said nobody knows what socialism and communism are. And he said because of our school system, people don't know what that is. So then I just repeat it the way I do. I'm kind of therapeutic when I'm on the radio. I said, so you think socialism and communism are the answer? He said, no, I'm not going to say that. Because people are too scared of those words here and they don't understand them. Nobody understands them. So I said, well, would you say that more democracy is going to solve the problem? And he said, yes. So I said, if you don't mind, I'm going to use that tonight. Julie?
Question. That was part of my question. What role or what function does the Communist Party have here now? I know we mentioned Democrat.
In Texas
Democrats, socialism.
or in America?
What about communism? What role? I guess in Texas.
Okay. There's a guy named Bernard that is forever trying to get me to organize for the Communist Party, and he writes to me all the time. He's in Houston. He says that there are 2,000 communists in Texas. I've known Bernard a long time, and there's probably 200. But Bernard says there's 2,000, which is how many live in Texas? 20 million? I think there's 20 million voters in Texas. So
It's 18, 20 million.
if he's got 2,000 members, I do believe that the Communist Party benefited somewhat from the Bernie Sanders campaign in 2016. And I know DSA did, Democratic Socialists of America.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
There's probably a dozen of you are members of the Democratic Socialists of America. They grew from a nondescript group of oddball radicals to a membership of 40,000
Wow.
oddball radicals in the space of a month or two after Bernie Sanders ran.
In the country.
Yeah, in the nation.
In the nation.
And they're here. They have meetings all over Dallas. They have a little group on healthcare, and a little group on unions, a little group on something, or a group on something else. I've been to a couple of their meetings, and they don't have a program, but they have a lot of energetic people, a lot of young, smart people that I'm sure are going to make a difference. Who's got the thing? Okay.
Your name is Gene?
Yes, sir.
I'm Greg. I think you make some good points, but I think you also overlook some things. The good points are corporations probably aren't incentivized to maximize the income and wealth of their employees, and that may be because our degenerate tax system has incentivized CEOs to maximize stock value regardless of the consequences by giving them stock options. When Congress lowered the taxes, they should have also done away with CEO stock options. But you know that's not going to happen because they play both sides of the street. No Democrat, no Republican is going to talk about that because they get too much money. Now, the things that you didn't, I wonder if you would agree that one of the things that keeps wages on the low end low is because there's a lot of competition for the jobs. There's too much of supply for the demand. Well, then, would you agree with Mr. Trump and me that what we ought to do is make sure that we don't have illegal foreign competition coming in to drive the wages down for our own citizens? Would you agree with that? Yes or no?
Oh, my own stand.
Why?
I'm going to be grilled. Well, I can only say yes or no. Hell no!
So you don't care about your own, the labor people who pay your salary. You don't care about them, do you?
Keep the volume down.
You don't care about them, do you? I knew you don't.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Everybody keep the volume down.
Waitress came over.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna play games with you. You go ahead and finish with what you want to
Well,
say.
that's it. I mean, it's
If you
my
have a
business.
question, ask it.
I ask you a simple question. I would agree with you that I think that corporations are not incentivized. Now, the other question is, you said you think labor unions, one of their roles is to, what's the matter with this thing? Okay, is to, all right.
There you go.
Is this better? Okay, all right. Is your basic premise then that unions are to represent their members in front of corporations to keep their salaries going up?
Are you through? Give him the mic.
Okay, would you also believe, do you think unions should also work to eliminate the costs that their employees encounter? The cost of living, like government taxes? Has any union ever lobbied any government entity to lower ad valorem taxes, sales taxes, income taxes, ever in the history of the union movement? It hasn't happened. Thank you.
Oh, he answered that one for me. There's an article in, I think it's today's paper. The lead editorial is that the Business Roundtable here in Dallas has met, and they have examined. They have said that they need to change their ways. In the past, businesses only wanted one thing, which was to maximize shareholder value, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And did you read the editorial?
No.
They said, well, then we're not going to do that
They're
anymore.
not doing it anymore.
From now on, we're taking social responsibility for our employees and our communities.
Can I respond to that?
Sounds good.
I love it. Well, I think there's a reason for their saying that. I think they're saying that because people are getting more and more wary of what corporations are doing, and they are not really going to start taking the membership of their employees as an important thing like shareholder value. But they said that, and they put it in the newspaper. It was a news article, and then today it was an editorial. Now on immigrants, this comes up all the time. Up until 1999, if you're not clear on this, up to 1999, the American labor movement in the person of the AFL-CIO, the AFL-CIO official position on all immigrants was to deport them. They didn't want any of them to be working here, and they said they bring down wages, and so we got to get rid of them. In 1999, they said, this doesn't work, it never did work, and it's still not working. They said the only thing we've got to do, that we can do, the only thing that does work is to organize and try to get better wages for everyone. To recognize that those guys picking pears, that have only been here 2 weeks from Guatemala or something, that they're workers. And we are workers. And we have that in common. And we all want better wages. And we need to work for it. Some of those guys who got deported in Mississippi week before last, some of those were union members. Not all of them, but some of them were. The meat cutters. They're members of the United Food and Commercial Workers Union. And so I thought that was simply wonderful. And I immediately helped organize the biggest pro-immigrant march that Dallas had ever seen up to that time. This was before 2006. That was when we had the big one. But in 1999, we had about 2,000, and it was the best we had ever done up to that time. And I am all for it. These guys, the ones that are making the sandwiches for American Airlines, are mostly from West Africa. And yet, the people who turned out for them were from here, you know, regular folks. There were, you know, the West Africans were there, of course, because it was their action. But the people who turned out for them were in solidarity with them, and I think that's simply wonderful. Now, unions do represent their members. It's the very best thing you can say about them. It's also the worst thing you can say about them, because they do represent their members. Presently, in my union, I have been the head of publications, the head of the publications committee in my union, in my local, since about 1985. And the current administration of my union said, you can't have it anymore. You're not the head of the publications committee anymore. So, and I published some stuff on the Facebook page, which I started. I started their website and their Facebook page. I started a whole lot of the Facebook pages and websites that you associate with labor today. And I started that one, so I posted to it regularly. And I was told, you can't post anymore. Unions represent their members. They do. Sometimes they do a good job. Sometimes they don't, but generally speaking, they represent their members very well, and it's the best thing you can say about them, but it's also the worst thing. My union president has decided that I'm too radical for our membership, and he doesn't, so he no longer lets me publish.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's happening.
Well, if you saw what I posted when I was at this thing, I posted a video of the president of the Texas AFL-CIO, and Facebook said for $42 we'll reach more people with it. So I was looking at it today, and it's reached 8,000 people. 2,400 of them have watched the whole video. 4 people shared it, and there were 26 comments. So I read the 26 comments. 24 of them were the worst anti-union screeds you ever saw in your life. With no justification whatsoever, they just said unions suck, unions stink, unions rich, you know. And I decided, you know, somebody's paying those guys.
Oh, absolutely.
I think somebody's paying those guys. But nevertheless, it's very interesting. I do communications for the Dallas AFL-CIO, so I post a lot of stuff on AFL-CIO, and I try to advertise all the progressive groups. Because what I really love about the AFL-CIO is that it's not just unions. They have faith in Texas. They have Jobs with Justice. They have Workers' Defense Project that they're working with, Texas Organizing Project, community groups, civil rights groups. The Dallas Labor Day breakfast will have a considerable number of people that are not union members. And I would like to encourage all of you to come to it. It's Monday, September the 2nd at 9 o'clock at Eddie Dean Ranch, 944 South Lamar. It does cost $35, but I think they're going to be selling tickets at the door. It's supposed to be 8:30 in the morning. at Eddie Dean Ranch, 944 South Lamar. After that, at 1 p.m., the Tarrant County AFL-CIO is having a free picnic, and that's the one I think your mother's going to, right? Ada French Goring is going to be going to that one. And you're going as well? Okay, well that'll be at Green Oaks 701 Northwest Green Oaks Boulevard in Arlington. And that was free, starting at 1 o'clock.
Isn't there another picnic that
The Democrats have theirs at noon at their new headquarters, 1414
Yeah, 14.
North Washington.
Oh, it's Washington.
Yeah, they're not going to do it out the Swiss place anymore. It's 1414 North Washington. It's 12 o'clock on new.
And we bring the desserts or.
I had a role in every one of these. At one time, there was nothing. About early 90s, we had a couple of Labor Days where there was just nothing, no official celebration at all. So me and my gang, we put on what we could. We did car caravans those years, which is pretty easy to organize. And when the Democrats first started having theirs, the woman's now a county commissioner, Teresa Daniels, she organized the first one, and she called me and asked me to come and sing Solidarity at their first Labor Day breakfast. So this has really picked up, and so now there's all kinds of Labor Day stuff. I went to a barbecue today that they call the pre-Labor Day breakfast over at Michelle's Union, and they're doing a lot.
Do you bring something to eat?
Someone
Do
said
you bring something to eat on that day?
for the Democrats
The Washington on Washington.
on Washington,
Yeah.
it is a covered dish thing. They want you to bring food, and I understand that the pastry line is just fabulous.
Everybody brings dessert.
I usually go to that one, but that's because the Tarrant has not had them very much. Now that woman sitting in the back there, her mother and I organized Labor Day for Tarrant County a couple, 3 years ago, because Tarrant County didn't have anything going. So we've had our association with Labor Day. I'm very proud of it, and I think it's pretty much the first, the center of work in the progressive movement. I think the AFL-CIO is the center of the progressive movement as it exists right now. It's not the Communist Party. It's not even the Democratic Socialists of America. It's the labor movement. And I encourage everybody to get involved with it. And I'm talking too much. Who's got the thing?
So, hi, my name is Lauren Tenney. I'm precinct chair in 3016 and moving to a North Dallas precinct chair position for the Democratic Party. In terms of the Democratic Party Labor Day picnic, they do ask for desserts and side dishes. And you're right, there is some bad-ass desserts there. I have gone sugar crazy there for the last 4 years. Jean, you look great. Thank you for coming tonight. I was so excited that I didn't have to work. I usually do work on Saturday nights, and I never make it to this. And I'm so grateful that it was the quiet night before the storm of catering starts again. My question for you, Jean, is I love your triangle. I work towards that triangle. That's what I do every day with everyone I meet, whether it's a 7-Eleven cashier or the kid assigned to my staff at my catering job, or the poor innocent soul who's getting mail at the same time as me. I love what you're saying. I'm curious what, aside from labor, which I agree, and I've agreed since the day I met you, and you convinced me the first moment I met you that a general strike is what we need, and I don't know when it's coming. 2020?
We're a long way from having a general strike.
2026? Who knows, right? But I agree. I'm there with you. I say it in every conversation I can say. I say, you know what? It's all good and dandy. Till we have a general strike, we're pretty much screwed. But my question is, you work with labor and you know a lot of the organizations, and I appreciate all the great things you say about Democratic Socialists. I think they're doing amazing work. I am a member, I'm a national member. I follow their local work. They do amazing community work, and it's incredible what the national provides support to that organization locally, and it is young people, and they're incredible. I'm pretty proud of what OR has done. I've stepped back, as many people know. I just have not been able to show up for stuff. But I'll tell you right now, your action and your understanding, there's a lot more than labor, than DSA, than OR, than the Democrats, than even the Republicans. Even the candidates are bringing understanding as they knock doors, and tons of people, more people than ever, are knocking doors. And it's impressive, and it's exactly what needs to happen. But what are the other organizations that are reaching out? And one that I wonder if you've heard of is the Global Oneness Project. And they recently had an article about the 5 habits that each individual needs to solidify democracy in the global perspective, and what other things you follow outside of Dallas, outside of Texas.
I don't know that group. I do, I'm just like you though, I'm on the internet, and so I get stuff from all kinds of people who especially want to reform the election process. And like you, I think that the general strike is a much more important tool for us. I think that that doesn't mean we're not crazy for voting, that we don't want everybody to go down and vote, but because voting is so easy. But ultimately, I think that we are going to have to withhold our labor in order to win. And I want to say something about the Trump supporters, because I recently had a conversation with a liberal friend of mine who said that the Trump supporters are hopeless. You can't do anything with them. You can't convince them. And didn't Mrs. Clinton say something disparaging? I've forgotten what it was.
I think it was deplorable.
Deplorable, that they were deplorable, or something like that. That cut off discussion, you know. So I asked my liberal friend, I said, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to kill them? Because there's millions of them, you know. Are you going to kill them? If not, then what is your plan? The plan has to be this. And I'm talking about Trump supporters. I'm talking about my friend right back there that's unhappy with my presentation. I'm talking about everybody. I'm talking about everybody. We have got to patiently explain. We've got to increase their understanding and their level of activity. And we are not going to take people out and kill them. It wouldn't work. It just wouldn't work. So explanation and is what we have to do, and it's going to be a long and hard road. But you're doing it right now, so it's not like it's difficult or something. And I look forward to hearing from you during the next part of the program. Am I answering? Did I skip your question? I've forgotten. Oh, you asked me if I've heard of these other organizations.
Basically, if there's some entity that you follow outside of Labor, Dallas.
Well, of course, I follow the Texas Alliance for Retired Americans.
I love that group.
It's a group for seniors, and of course, about half of you are members of it. I used to be the president of it, and it's a very good organization. Anything associated with labor, I put a priority on, because it's people who work that are going to have to take away the power from those who employ us. That's what ultimately has to happen. I would emphasize, though, that it's not very likely that we're going to win elections. That's why I've never joined the Democratic Socialists of America, because their idea is to take over the Democratic Party. And I don't think, first of all, I don't think they will take over the Democratic Party. As it's been pointed out by several of you, the Democrats they have some of the same guys that the Republicans have. In fact, some of them are the same guys. Trump himself was a big donor to the Democratic Party at one time, or says he was. So I don't think it's going to come from the Democrats or the Republicans. I think it's going to come from working people And I think that the main strength that working people have is to not work, to stop working. So that's my message. And I'm sticking to it.
I have a question as it relates to even the Democratic Socialists, the naming of such. Because we know that the Republicans have always played football with terms like welfare, that's connected to communism, social program. Sorry, can you hear me? I'm sorry. I was just saying that the term Democratic Socialists, okay, it is scary to most people in this country because the Republican Party has always associated anything such as welfare or unions or any social...
It's the road to serfdom.
In their mind, yeah.
I think the rule is only one fool at a time.
Well,
so if you're the second fool, you have to wait.
But what I was saying is that the nomenclature is what I think turns most people off. Because if you look at countries that claim they have socialism per se as their form of government, you know, and you can look into Scandinavian countries, you know, there's a lot of rosy-cheeked people dancing in the streets there. They don't look like they're oppressed by any communist doctrine or what have you, and all their needs are taken care of because they pay the taxes to have certain basic things in play, like healthcare, education, you know, childcare, so on and so forth, so one can go on to not only have a productive life, but a quality life. And they do indeed have the ability to, what's the terminology in the 14th Amendment, freedom and pursuit of happiness and all of that. Yeah, so what do you think, why do you think that the Democrats haven't put down that word and really come back at the Republicans, you know, highlighting, this is what we're talking about. Okay, this is not, you know, some black cloud that is in your future and that you will be oppressed or in serfdom, because we are serfs now or on our way. And with no, you know, and people don't even understand that it's bloody well happening to them. It's just really bad news. And I don't care whether you're a Trumper or a Republican, because Trump is, I don't consider him the bad apple in the barrel. I agree with you. This happened long before Trump ever came on the scene. Okay, but I do think that he is the putrid apple because he gets the voice. Okay, and I also, far worse than Trump, because he happened long before Trump, is McConnell. So it doesn't matter what Obama intentions were, and the fact that he did resurrect our image in the world from a George Bush presidency. I don't think that George Bush meant to be stupid, he just came off that way. Okay, and so, do you know what I'm saying? So, what do you think they can do?
Cannot have a 5-minute question.
Well, that's
Get the mark.
what I think. And what do you think?
In other words, why aren't the Democrats doing something about the fact that Trump is hanging socialism around their necks and expects them to sync with it? Well, after all, most of us in this room are old enough to know that we've been indoctrinated, thoroughly indoctrinated, against the word socialism and the word communism. And when I was a kid, it was every other movie. There were songs. There was the whole culture was anti-communism. It's a religion in America. Now, young people tell me that it's not affecting them. Younger people, millennials, tell me, "What do you mean anti-communism? I don't even know what that is." But boy, I know what it is because I went to see My Son John with Helen Hayes. You remember that movie?
Yeah.
Her son joined the Communist Party. And, of course, he got killed. They killed him. That was the most merciful thing you could do after they got infected. Anyway, the word socialist has gained a lot of credibility since Mr. Sanders first ran in 2016. And I understand that some 40-something% of people now approve of the word socialist. It's better than the word capitalist. People don't approve of the word capitalist very well. But the Democrats are afraid of being called socialist, and the one from Massachusetts, Mrs. Warren, has deliberately and emphatically stated that she is a capitalist, not a socialist, and not one of those Bernieites. And I think that's because that they don't think a socialist can win. And I think that's why the Democrats went so far in 2016 to keep Bernie off the ballot, because they didn't want to take their chances. And as I said a long time ago, they really don't want to change the system. They just want to be in charge of it. They want to take it over. They don't want to change it. And that's the way they've always been. That's the way they still are. So why don't they explain socialism better? Did you notice that I didn't bring it up? You guys brought it up. I said more democracy. Some people would say more democracy is socialism. Yeah. But I think we can understand more democracy. If we had the democracy not only to vote on whether to have a Democrat or a Republican, but if we actually had the democratic right to vote on how many people are going to get laid off in the next layoff, how many, what's the General Motors contract going to look like? It's going to affect a lot of us, not just the 150,000 workers that work for the auto companies, but it affects a lot of us. So why don't we get a vote on it? And if we had democracy on economic questions and on foreign policy questions, we'd have a lot more democracy than we do today. And it would be a good thing, and you can call it anything you want to. I call it more democracy. And I think it's the solution, and I would like to think that the candidates would agree with that. And they don't have to use the word socialism if they don't want to. For a lot of us older people, it's really a scary word. Yes, sir.
Thank you so much for your talk. I'll try to keep it extremely short. The way I try to keep my things short is sticking with the question. Sticking with the question. All right, so you talked a lot about fundamental change. You're looking for fundamental change, and how all candidates that you've seen so far have not demonstrated that they're going to bring fundamental change. So if you were to enumerate what are the 3 or 4 or 5, what are the key ingredients of fundamental change that you're looking for? Was that short enough?
Fundamental change that I'm looking for is more democracy. It's not 4 or 5 things. It's 1, more democracy. I want the people to be put in charge. And I don't think that any of the candidates can give us that, even Bernie. Bernie himself says he can't do it. He says it's going to take a movement. He says you have to build a movement. Bernie is the only candidate, as far as I know, that has called for a movement, and that sponsors a movement, and that generates a movement, and that makes the movement go forward. Just on the candidates, because I know everybody's trying to pick their favorite candidate or something. As far as I'm concerned, President Obama was a great president. He was as good as the Democrats get. He took an administration in an economic crisis. It was not the worst economic crisis that America had ever seen. It was the second worst. And he did the right things, I think, in trying to lead the world towards solutions of the world's problems, not just American problems. As far as I'm concerned, Mr. Obama was as good as it gets. I don't think any of the candidates is as good as he was. That's just an opinion. But he couldn't make the change. He couldn't make the fundamental change. I had friends that were crazy about Obama that a year later hated him, or going around bad-mouthing him, saying he's failed us. he sold us out. You know, that wasn't true. He did what he could do under the constraints that he was under, with the government and representing the party that he represented. I would like to see Elizabeth Warren do better, and if she gets elected, or Mr. Yang, did I get it? I'm sorry if I messed up his name.
Yeah.
I would like to see them do better, but they won't. And I don't do better than Obama. He was great.
He was great.
And he couldn't make the change. Nobody can. Even Sanders can't. It's going to take you. I got an absolute thrill because I was so disappointed in the Texas AFL-CIO convention, because it happened the day before it started. The Puerto Ricans overthrew their government, and they didn't talk about that. I thought, boy, this is going to be the subject of this whole convention, is how can we do what the Puerto Ricans did? And they didn't. But at the last night, I was talking to Willie Gonzalez, who's the organizer for these guys. And I was asking everybody, you know, who do you think can provide fundamental change? And one guy was saying that he thought Elizabeth Warren. And so I asked Willie, and he said, none of them. He said, it's us. It's us. It's us.
At the beginning of your speech, I thought you might have hit something right on the nail. And I want to, if you could confirm that I understood you correctly. You said did you say that the model of organizing labor is shifting away from the job site and more into residential areas, people who have affinity groups? I think affinity group might be a technical word.
I think you're right.
Is that what you're saying?
What is it? Affinity groups, yeah.
Yeah, it's not just you're trying to get people who have similar belief sets.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. For years, labor represented labor. That was all they did.
Right.
Then they got off into politics.
Oh no, they were always in politics.
Politics. So, if you knew that limiting your advocacy just to the economic and the well-being of your union members would double your membership, would you stop supporting left-wing causes?
Are you gonna put the microphone down?
Well, I don't know what you're gonna say.
Okay, next question.
He's had his question.
That's my question.
And he wants to drill me. Tom, I'm not gonna stand here and be drilled.
I'm just asking you, I'm asking.
Give Tom the microphone and I'll answer your question. No, I don't think so. Labor has always been in politics. In fact, what was the guy's name who started the AFL-CIO? Died in San Antonio. He believed that politics was really like the major thing, and they've always been in politics. They believed that they got Abraham Lincoln elected, and they thought the unions believed that it was unionized workers around Chicago that got Abraham Lincoln elected. And they think the same thing about Franklin Roosevelt, that unions got him elected, and that the good things that came from those administrations came about because of labor's involvement in politics. So they've always been involved in politics, and they still are. And they have never been just pork chop. They've never been just economic, you know, getting more wages for their members. Unfortunately, for the period from 1947 to 1995, they did not try to develop allies, but they were very much in politics. And I read one book that said that labor had died during the McGovern campaign because they refused to support McGovern, and they tacitly supported Nixon, and that was the death of labor, according to this one book. But they've always been in politics, and they always will be, and I definitely support that. I think that it's a wedge of division going on in the union movement right now, that a lot of the members, a lot of my own members, I'm the president of the retirees at UAW Local 848, and I have a number of Trump supporters among the group, and at least 3 of them on the executive board. And whereas they agree with me on pork chop issues, they agree with me that the union has provided a good living for their families and that they want the union to continue doing that. But they're Trump supporters and they do not want the union to support the Democratic candidate in the next election. So it's dividing the union movement very much. When we divide it, we lose.
You get to sit down.
Yay!
Okay, now it's your turn to talk, so whoever wants to get up here can, and you got 5 minutes, either for or against what the speaker had to say.
I knew it was going to be a lot of competition, so that's why I got up.
I'll be next sometime.
I want to thank you for your report. I have brothers who worked in unionized work, Mobile Oil, Almacor Steel, and the middle class was actually established by people who worked in heavy industry and made good salaries. And I think it had some of a ripple effect on all of us. And one of the things I'm more particular about, like Beaumont, Texas, I used to work there summers when I was in college, in high school. Very racist community, but the labor unions had a set of trend that we had one of the only, the second representative that voted for the Civil Rights Act was from Beaumont.
Is that right?
And then in Houston, they just was more progressive, and it was a ripple effect involving the whole community. And so I think they were doing it somewhat then. I agree the big thing is understanding. And in my study of political science is that a democracy can't exist when people are ignorant. They have to be educated. And one of the things that I think that I was in hope that you deal with is the polarization that we have in our national community. How do we get beyond that without some major catastrophe? I think we all probably want the same thing, but we have a different strategy of doing it. And how do we get people to see that we all are in this boat together, we're all in this world together? And we've got to understand that many of the problems that we talk about, global warming, that's a world problem. We can't just fix it in the United States but it's wherever the wind blows, it goes. The economy is really that way. It's a world economy, whether we think it. I don't care what President Trump says, it's a world economy. And we gotta operate within that world economy. And so I think that's one of the things we really need to deal with. I want to deal with the question, I believe the gentleman left, about Democrats. Democrats, the idea of the Democrats framing, being reframed by Republicans started when Al Gore ran. They defined who he was and he didn't really define himself. And I think the first thing Democrats have to define themselves, who they are. And with 22 candidates running the primary, you've got a broad spectrum of people. So I don't think that many of the things that the most liberal Democrats that are running, I don't think it will even happen, because even President Obama, I thought, was a class act. He couldn't get the Republicans to do anything after 2010. After they gained control of the House, nothing. And so we got to deal with that. And so a large number of people believe that socialism and communism, Social Security is socialism, education is socialism, transportation is socialism. It's all there. It's how a group of people get together to get things done that we individually can't do for ourselves. And if we could get people to understand that, and it's not Russia or China or some of the most communist, then I think we would do better with it. How do we educate them with that? How do we get how we get them out of it. That's one of the things I was expecting from you. Democratic power, Democrats, the most radical Republicans were former Democrats.
Well, Dixiecrats.
They was in a lot of them from Texas. And the way the Democrats, as far as African Americans, they're the ones that did the hurt to us. They're the ones who passed all the black codes. And they were always, Texas, the Democratic politics was able to convince enough Democrats that they were on their sides or something. And the only thing I can think is you could go to Neiman Marcus if you were a black young lady. You could buy it, you couldn't try it on, and you couldn't return it. So I call that consumer integration. Anything a black person could buy and take with them and don't take it back. They could buy it if they had the money for it. And they thought they were better than the people in Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia where things appeared to be worse. But they had to be producers. And that's why you have more black business people in those states than we have in Texas. Because we just consumed and we didn't produce. And that's one of the problems we have. But I think Democrats have to define themselves and stick with it. And then Republicans can't do it. But if we don't define who we are, then they will define it for us. I'm for democracy just like you are. But I think we got to do a much better job of educating people. I really like what the Occupy Wall Street Group did in 2014. I think they did a remarkable job. They were not hierarchically organized, but they were able to convince their parents that they were being used by the system. And I think that had a major impact on President Obama getting reelected, because they were able to convince the parents that. And that's what I think, I look at the millenniums and I like a lot of the things about them, and I hope that but we do have real issues. And voting is one of them, but the decision the Supreme Court made about gerrymandering, that was made years ago, and Chief Justice Roberts believed in presidents. He's not going to change the president. And that was already set, and that's what I did. But I think it's totally unconstitutional. I don't think there was anything in the intents of the Federalist Paper or what the original founders would think was talking about. Not even the United decision that money was power you can control with money. So that's my thing. I think we need to have, people need to understand the importance of voting and what impact it has. But I don't think the average person do. I worked the polls, and I know some people talk about the tricky computer, electoral or the voting machines. A lot of that's not true. I worked the polls. I saw what they did at both ends, working in the polls and then working in the county doing the election returns. And there was nothing wrong with those machines. Yeah, but it was something wrong with people who came in to vote in a primary, didn't know the difference. You want to vote a straight ticket, and you can't do that in a primary. And another thing has happened after 2020, I think in 2020, they passed a law in Texas, you can't vote a straight ticket.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
You can't vote a straight ticket.
They changed it.
When they change it?
Recently, that came about. Was
The last
the last
She's
legislature?
agreeing.
Because of, I guess a lot of that went with Beta, that turned a lot of Democratic.
Yeah, but they changed, they are not doing away with it.
No, they are doing away with it.
That's what I'm saying. That's done away with, and I don't see why somebody's not suing about it. I've talked 5 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, all right, Gene, I'm going to say something heretical, and that is, should we really have unions? I'm somewhat against the need for unions. Now, the charlatan Tony Blair said that he was against crime, but fundamentally he was against the causes of crime. And so what I'd like to address is the causes of trades unions. Now, basically what we have is, coming from a class-based system in England, a them and us attitude, okay? Now, if you're gonna have trade unions, they need to be in the right spot, as they do in Germany, and have them sitting on the boards of company.
Yes.
because most of these boards do not know what's going on in the company. I mean, as someone who wrote tons of progress reports, I know that the information going up to the top is a pack of lies. And so, and these geniuses at the top, as Trump claims to be, you know, a consistent genius, etc., they really don't know what's going on. They don't deign to come down into the coalface and figure out what's going on. And many times, the only time you know what's going on is because the people on the work face, you know, the coalface, actually know what's going on. And so when you have a system that ignores what's going on, then you don't have a good system, okay? And so that's and so the other thing why I advocate is democracy, but economic democracy, where the people of the workforce can control the workings of their own company and vote in an employee-owned company. And the biggest one in America is called Publix in Florida. I think it's about 200,000 employees. People are dying to join it, actually. And the company, and Jim Peeler was here, and he's way injured, but he worked for a company in Dallas that was employee-owned, and he loved it. And he said the incentives and so on were remarkable, and people really felt they owned it, okay? And so really, it's the system that's gone wrong. It's this whole capitalist system, the way it works. Yes, you need capital, okay? You know, but when it's controlled by especially Wall Street, there's just a corrupt casino, basically. And the whole notion, the dogma behind it is incorrect. And the economics behind it is incorrect. But if you'd like to know more, then I wrote a book about, just after the big crash, 2008, called Sabotaging America. I do recommend it because it goes into economics and what's gone wrong. And so for my money, if you're going to have a democracy, everyone needs a say. And even the guy, you know, even the janitor should have a say. In fact, I think sometimes the janitor, I've said this before, is more important than the CEO. Because if you walk into a place and it's dirty and disgusting, you say, my goodness, what a lousy joint this is. And so everyone's important in a company, and everybody should have a say. But you know, if you gainsay something in corporate America, as I've often done, is get out. Because you're not, how dare you say something? You're not earning, 50 million a year, as I am. And actually, talking about fascism and communism, in fact, Oswald Mosley, who was the fascist leader in England in the 30s, actually started off as a member of the Labour Party. But he got so disgusted with what was going on, he felt the only way to go is like becoming a Hitler in Germany. And certainly, if you look at what happened in Germany in the 30s, yes, they did recover. It made a remarkable economic recovery because it was a command state. It's a horrible state, but they did make things work. And so that's why people, and this is what really I think the latter-day Trump is doing. He's turning it into a command state. Now, much of what he says is true. Now, the way he's going about it is fascistic. And of course, in many ways, it's totally incorrect. But some of the things he says is correct. Because it's actually the corporations that sabotage the country by shipping jobs overseas, shipping technology overseas, and so on. And obviously, what they've done is decrease the GNP and so on. So listen, I think it's a system that's wrong. You must believe in true democracy, which will give everybody a say.
Well, I didn't know there was a line for
Well, there
it.
is.
And there is.
Good talking right here. I forgot.
Down the aisle.
Yeah, I'm gonna have this recording. In 1926.
My comments have more to do with perspective. And for the person who was asking about the Democrats is gone, as you said, he's gone. The news has been reporting for some time, for months actually, that there is a shortage of workers. And hence we need the immigrants for the shortage. And well, that's just a brief comment, but Mary Beth Rogers wrote a book called Turning Texas Blue, and she was Ann Richards' campaign chairman. And she said that after Ann lost to George Bush, that Democrats in Texas felt so defeated, they just sat back and just let things happen. And the thing about Trump coming into the administration is that they're no longer sitting back. The Democratic Party is getting very organized in Dallas, and if you really are interested, you can look at their website. Jean's talk tonight was listed as an event. This morning they had Operation Blue, which was for precinct workers and anyone else who's interested, training for how to get people out to vote. An author recently not so recently, but in the past year or so on NPR, who wrote a book, said it was called How Democracy Works, and he said it only really works when 90% of those that are eligible to vote do. And that when democracy began, they would have once a month in their villages, they would have everybody come together and talk about problems. Well, we don't do that. I mean, we let those folks take care of it now. That's what we've been doing, letting those administrators take care of it. But everyone has to be involved, as Jean says. I believe that you were making that point tonight. Everyone has to be involved, and that is beginning to happen. So that's a hopeful note. Whether or not, you know, it will, I don't think important things really happen very fast. But people are getting more involved, and they're getting more organized, which is a very hopeful note. Let's see, what else did I, oh, and there was, in this last election, he said, why aren't the Democrats winning? The Democrats made great gains in this last election. The whole, y'all, some of you can help me out with this, the whole courts of appeals all became Democrats, several women were elected, and Republicans in Texas are deciding that they want to spend time with their families at this particular time. So progress for Democrats is being made. Now, Jean says Democrats are not particularly energized to make a great change, but I don't know what to say except people are becoming more involved. Operation Blue was really good, and check out the Democratic website. And bipartisan and the youth, we have it here tonight. We had, and boy, at the debate, the last debate party, I'm telling you, those folks that were with, tell me your first name. They're Yang, but what is your name?
Well, I'm Hexel, Colorado.
Okay. They were fired up. It was just inspiring to see how fired up they were. They were ready to go, and they were saying, okay, our next task is to get into North Texas University. And, you know, they are fired up. The youth, the youth are actually involved now.
Wait, I'm involved too.
Okay.
You're young at heart, young at heart.
Yes, and several protests I've been to, there are lots of young people there. Kids in high school holding up signs that they made, beautiful signs in Plano. I thought, oh my gosh, they're so artistic. But the youth is getting involved, so there's a hopeful note there. Anyway, that's my message. Thank you.
Thank you.
Here, we have.
I'll keep it very brief. I know there's a lot of people who want to talk, and I'm not going to make this a soapbox, and that'll make it even shorter. And so I wanted to have 4 points of appreciation for what Gene said. One of the things I appreciated about what he said was on the topic of immigration. As an immigrant myself, well, as a family of immigrants, I was born here in Dallas, born in Baylor University Medical Center. I appreciated the positive comments you had. Immigrants are being scapegoated for things that they're not their fault. You know, they create over $300 billion in tax revenue every year. And when you look at job loss, people like Trump will blame immigrants when the reality is when you look at 5 million manufacturing jobs lost since 2000, none of them have come back. 1 million of them went overseas, and 4 million of them were lost to automation. So I appreciate the comments that you made there. I also appreciate the comment you said about how Trump is not the cause, Trump is the symptom. And whoever comes into office in 2020 has to keep that in mind and not treat him as the singular problem. Because one thing that Trump did, and I think you alluded to this, is that Trump, what his saying was, make America great again. And then the Democratic response was, it's already great. But then you have people who live in Youngstown, Ohio, or all these swing states that voted for Obama in 2008 and 2012, then voted for Trump in 2016. For them, when the Democratic response was, no, America's already great, there's nothing wrong, then someone like Trump, who's an outsider, who promises the fundamental change, they decide this is the person for them. And so whoever comes into office next has to address what you're talking about, which is he's not the cause, but he's the symptom. I also appreciated your sentiments about the capitalist and socialist dichotomy. I think that one of the things we gain from here is that we have to move past just one or the other, because some people here brought up Scandinavian countries as a great example, and those countries are mixed economies. They have aspects of it that are socialist, like their healthcare and their medicine, but people can also live there and own businesses, and so a lot of the things that people on the right are scared of in regard to social democracies are not founded in countries like that. So I appreciate your comments that getting past that discussion. And then finally, coming back to fundamental change, I really appreciated the discussion about how if we keep electing like the same flavor of people, and if we don't look at like who is generating a movement, I think you had a great answer to my question earlier, which is what is the key ingredient that we need? It's someone that can actually mobilize people, not just on the left, not just on the right, but who can mobilize us forward. So those are 4 areas that I really appreciate you bringing up, and I really enjoyed your talk. So thank you.
Go ahead. Okay. Let me set my timer. I don't think I'm going to use a full 5 minutes. I also appreciate this is the first time I've been here, Lorraine, so.
Oh, yeah, I'm not.
So I don't mind it. I really appreciate the audience. I'm not a public speaker, so I'm very nervous about this. But I just wanted to point out a couple of things. I'm a big fan of Frederick Hayek. Does anybody know who Frederick Hayek is? Hayek, right. And he wrote the book Road to Serfdom. Right, Road to Serfdom. And his complaint about socialism fell right into what my degree program was at SMU, which is Doctor of Engineering. I took a class in optimal control theory. And control, the knobs you turn, every time you turn that knob, it costs you something. And every time you push something out, it costs you something. So the cost of control is a large factor. And I look at like, the rocket that Elon Musk was able to land, was that the Falcon Heavy, right? And all the boosters. He didn't try to, land it with all those rockets running all the time. He used the force of gravity and little nudges, and he was able to get it safely to the ground. And that's what we could do with our economy. And here's how. We use people, their money, because here's the thing. In the United States, we had a constitution, we had the most brilliant peoples, enlightened guys. They said that the main purpose of government was to secure the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity. And liberty only has 2 parts to it. Freedom from arbitrary authority and the means to exercise free will. Because if you don't have the money to do what you need to do, or somebody's got their boot on your neck, you don't have liberty. And that was the thing that they wanted most about our people, liberty. And how do you do that? I think Andrew Yang has a plan to get us all $1,000 a month. And it's not going to be like, oh, we're going to start, taxing the very wealthy. It's going to be taxing everybody on a value-added tax, which is a consumption tax. Okay, so the more you consume, the more taxes you pay. So nobody's being coerced to pay taxes. But if they want to buy that, Maserati or some $400,000 Rolls Royce, they've got the money to pay the taxes. And if they don't want to pay the taxes, they don't have to buy the Rolls Royce. They are, but that's very regressive. And so when you look at it, you have to have that $1,000 a month for everyone, whether they make money or they don't make money, every month to get the boot off their neck and have the means to exercise free will. And that means if you spend less than $120,000, you're coming out ahead. And that's a good way to go, because capitalism does work. It provides a lot of capital for a lot of people. And it's too bad Social Security, when there was 8% return on government debt, was able to fund itself. Now it's like 0.5%, and we can't fund it with the income from that debt anymore. But when I look at it, anybody who's not working must have some money coming in from their investments. And in order to make capitalism work, you have to have more people, have more investments. And so how much time do I got left? Probably not much.
You got your clock, huh?
I thought I did. Oh, I got another minute. I'm going to give up my minute to Lorraine.
You didn't say what you want to say. I didn't have a beef with you.
So here's the deal. Lobbyists in Congress, they buy Congress. They write the bills. They fund the $45,000 a day, which they need in order to get elected. It's just a huge amount of money. They don't do it just for grins. They do it because they want a return on investment. And what kind of return do they get? On average, they get 120 times. For every dollar that they put in, they get $120 back. Now you could do the same thing. Actually, you could do 10,000% return. All you got to do is go to Hexel's website and
Yang2020.com.
What is it?
Yang2020.com.
Yang2020.com. I'd rather you do it through the Dallas DFW website for reading, and just donate $1 a month. And that $1 a month, you could say, I'm the world's greatest lobbyist because I'm going to get a $10,000 return, 10,000% return on that money. And that's, one more thing. That's why Yang has more small donors than Bernie Sanders does, percentage-wise.
Three. It's the Rubin lobby.
Okie doke. I've just got a couple of, I hope, short answers or responses to things. First off, to the gentleman that had the question as it relates to what's government doing, okay, to help out or to help corporations have their employees pay less taxes. Okay, answer's very simple.
That's labor unions.
You asked about what's government doing.
What's
you said,
labor union doing?
Yeah, but labor unions, but also, but you also said that corporations could also help have their people pay less in taxes. Whatever. If I misunderstood it doesn't matter because the answer applies. Still, I don't care whether it's the government or labor unions or what have you. The answer is the corporations must pay more taxes, period. Okay? And anyone that sits back and thinks the corporations need to have all these tax breaks in order to make jobs available to people are in la-la land. That's been the excuse since 1980 when Reagan hit the scene, okay, that we need to give these corporations a break so they can make more jobs available and, you know, free up this oppressive tax system that we put these poor, you know, corporate, you know, citizens in. Okay, I haven't met a poor CEO yet, and what they're earning today is obscene. As it relates to immigrants, labor, and all the, you know, the fact that everything has been put on the backs of supposed illegal immigrants and as if taking jobs away, okay? And yet we don't stop and think. Even recent in Mississippi and the likes where they passed laws, okay, they couldn't get all these legal American citizens to come out and pick tomatoes for $10 an hour. Wasn't going to happen, okay? And yet, through our legal system, we have all these immigrants that come in from overseas, India, China, what have you, and they take the jobs, the tech jobs, the high-paying jobs, out of Americans' hands, and those Americans can even get an incentive if they train someone to do their job for them, or to train someone to take over their job while they go to the unemployment line. Okay, this was absolutely against the law in days gone by. If an American was qualified to do a job, they didn't care if you had PhDs from every major city in Europe, England, or what have you. You did not get that job if an American could do the job. If an American was not qualified to do the job, then you could apply for the work permit and it probably would be, you know, made available to you. One of the jobs that was easy to fill in those days was that of a butler. There weren't a lot of American butlers running around, so that was an easy job to come in and take over because there weren't qualified Americans. That's not happening today. They have carte blanche to bring in people and literally remove an American from a job and have a foreigner have that job in play, and at a lesser wage, obviously. And this goes on all the time in Silicon Valley, and it's a disgrace, and it's an open thing. And and all the Chinese women that come in here, there's a special setup, particularly on the West Coast. They're preggers when they come in. They lie about how pregnant they are. They come over here and they have their kids and they become American citizens, the kids, and then they go back home. It's an open secret, yet the government does nothing to stop this. But to me, those are illegal immigrants. But we don't hear about that because there's a nice little cottage industry going on the West Coast. But let's put it on the backs of people that have come into this country for years and built our homes, picked all our produce, and so on and so forth. Texas would not be Texas today if it was not for, you know, the predominantly Mexican immigrants that have come into this state. So the hypocrisy is atrocious. It's appalling in the verbiage that goes around it, okay? And the way now these people are treated coming into our borders is an absolute disgrace from every aspect that I can think of. As it relates to unions, I do believe more applicable in days gone by is that they did indeed perform a valuable social service to society as a large, because it has taken many people out of poverty, out of a working class environment, and made the opportunity of having a middle class lifestyle happening. I agree with you, Jean, that, you know, it's not as it's hard to organize because so many jobs have been displaced and put overseas. John, I agree with you that those people should be sitting on boards. They don't have to even be, you know, maybe collecting as many dues and what have you. If they have a voice in the corporation, better still if the corporation is employee owned, but that's not going to happen overnight. Because I also think that unions can become abusive, okay, or had in the past become abusive as far as taking dues and not delivering much back to the employees that were paying those dues. But I absolutely believe that they perform a great, or have performed a great service to working society. Okay?
Anybody else? Okay. I was gonna.
Go ahead.
I guess I can go now. All right. What are you?
It's getting late.
So your name is Mrs. Rubin?
No, my former marriage, I've had 3.
He's just
English,
but he wouldn't know.
John and Aaron have known me by the name of Reuben as well. It's now Pete.
Reuben, okay. Well, I'm glad we agree upon one thing. America is one of the only countries that allows birthright citizenship, and it's an absolute outrage. So you would, since you disagree with that shameful practice, then you must agree with Mr. Trump, who just this week announced that he was going to revisit this idea of people coming across the border with being 9 months pregnant and giving birth and having an American citizen. That is an outrage. It is contrary to the Constitution.
I would agree with that, but I would not agree with the ugliness that Donald Trump puts around that kind of conversation.
Well, it's the facts are facts.
Okay,
and
your 5 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. The problem. I don't want to get off into illegal immigration. The problem is, if you say people won't do the job, that's fine. The job should stay vacant. The market is telling the employer that he's paying too little, $10 an hour. You yap about having to legally coerce people to pay $15 an hour if you didn't have cheap illegal foreign, and the point is illegal aliens, then the price for the job would have to rise or the employer would go out of business. And I'll guarantee you the employer is not going to go out of business. He's going to raise the price. He or she may kick and scream, but they will raise the price. The problem is not immigration. The problem is illegal immigration. We have a set of laws, and we are a country of laws. If you don't want to follow the law, then go someplace else. Trump is the principal reason Trump got elected is even Republicans wouldn't enforce that law. The rats like the Shrub family are to blame for it. They listen to you talk about the $1 billion and the $1 million friends who buy Congress. They couldn't buy Donald Trump. Now, to get on what I wanted to talk about, I don't know where the money would come from to give $1,000. I thought it was $1,000 a year, but you're saying $1,000 a month. If we have 320 million people in this country, 1,000 million is $1 billion. So that means every month we'd have to come up with $320 billion. That's going to be around $4 trillion a year. So you said you went to SMU as engineering. Maybe I made a mistake in my arithmetic. And if you can show me where I'm wrong, I'd love to see it.
Okay.
But afterwards, okay, voting machines is a real serious problem. It is worse than the old Chicago, Boston, Cleveland scam of having the dead vote. There is a lady who has spoken here by the name of Laura Presley from Austin. She has a website, and if you're concerned about integrity in voting, I would recommend that you Google Laura Presley. And I don't know if she's a Republican or Democrat, but I kind of think she's a donkey. She has uncovered the fact that the great, grand, and glorious Secretary of State and all the judges in the different counties do not follow Texas written black letter law. And they did everything to coerce her out of doing it. Voting is not regulated by the federal government, but for better or for worse. Under our Constitution, it's regulated by states. Now, if you think that the federal government, you remember this fella Epstein, who was put on a suicide watch, one person, and they couldn't keep him alive. If you think that that's good government service, or if the VAs who can't service their own veterans is a good way, or the fact that the military can't stop soldiers from committing suicide, then you must think that they'll be a great administrator of the election system. I don't think we want to have the federal government yet. Gerrymandering is an old practice that goes back to a man named Elbridge Gerry, who was a governor of Massachusetts. I don't remember if he was a donkey or an elephant or a federalist. Anyway, this practice got used rampantly in the 70s when federal courts wanted to quote, enfranchise minorities. There was one infamous district in North Carolina that had 2 pods at each end, and they were connected by a strip that was so narrow that if you opened a car door on each side, you'd be out of the district. Well, now that the states, now that it's shifted back the other way, all of a sudden the liberals, the progressives, the Democrats want to be high and holy. What we say is, what was good for the goose is now good for the gander. You want more voting? Well, we got more voting. Because up until around the period of World War I, senators were elected by each legislature. Legislatures were easily controlled by people. Then we had this great constitutional amendment that allowed senators to be elected directly. Well, that made it more, with time and money, that made it more difficult for average people to have control. The second thing that came in was called
17th Amendment.
A national income tax. And it was originally supposed to only apply to people making $25,000 a year. Well, $25,000 a year in 1915 or 16, whoever went in, was about the top 1%. Well, you see how many people, it just grows and grows. If we didn't have an income tax, you gripe about the military-industrial complex, there would be no military-industrial complex unless the people approved for it. These 2 ideas didn't come from big government. They didn't come from a Democrat or Republicans or Democrats. They came from the progressive movement. So sometimes you want to be careful what you work for. You may get it. The AFL-CIO, I think, rightly stood up for workers' rights until, as you pointed out, 1999. Even the great late Cesar Chavez was absolutely opposed to wetbacks and illegal labor coming in and taking his jobs apart from his people. But somehow labor has gotten away from its mooring. How much more time do I have?
None.
None? Okay. None. AOC had 16,000 votes in her election. There are 325,000 Democrats in her district.
Okay, can we get somebody timing me here at the back, please? Hello, at the back? Is he gonna time me?
I got you.
You got me, okay. All right. One of the issues is, how many times have you heard the petrodollar mentioned in the news here lately?
Not much.
You're not hearing it. That's because we don't have a media anymore. We have lost the petrodollar. The world is no longer going with the U.S. currency as the currency to exchange oil and things like that.
Yeah, the reserve.
The reserve currency. Now, we're in the midst of a mega financial change worldwide. I have said this before at this mic in other meetings. Some of the actions that Trump is taking in the negotiations everyone is critical of would have been taken or would be taken by any leader sitting in his position there. Because you cannot go to a currency change, move to an asset-backed currency, which the world is moving towards right now, and have $800 billion deficits with China. You just can't do that. Otherwise, within years, you won't have a country. Now, this is one of those things where there are things that have to be balanced out as we go through economic changes. I don't know what's going to happen in the coming months. I would advise everybody put back gallons of water and a little bit of spare food. Make sure you got cat food, dog food. Make sure your animals are taken care of, because we can go through some interesting times here, as the Chinese say. And I think we're going to come out on top of things, but we may have some devaluation of the dollar. I think it's possible. The only problem is it's not really a problem, I suppose, for us, but Europe's doing worse. And this was brought up. They're literally on the ropes right now. Some of these countries, mentioning earlier Scandinavia, they're pulling goose eggs. They're going into negative interest. I mean, they're in really bad shape. And China is having major problems. So the entire economies of the world are in an upheaval. The debt has to be dumped somehow. And some of the best minds are working on that. And Trump is a figurehead. Some of the things he's doing, we probably won't understand until afterward. I mean, he's a good pinata. He's a good person to take aim at, blindfolded or not. As far as the voting, Bev Harris wrote one of the best books on voting. It's called Black Box Voting. Personally, I did a whole convention on vote fraud back in 2000. It was the National Vote Fraud Convention in Cincinnati, and I did the videotaping for it. Let me assure you, Calvin, the votes are being rigged. They're being rigged regularly, and our esteemed officials in Austin are covering up for it. They're not supplying the records they are lawfully supposed to be supplying. The former speaker was correct on that. So we have some major problems. The reason the Democrats are not objecting more, I surmise, other people have surmised, is because they're going to get their turn as well. And then those same mechanisms will go in their favor. This is a problem. People are looking at Trump and they're saying he's getting near to being a fascist dictator. That can flip the other way if a Democrat is in there. I think one of the issues we need to consider is that whatever work our leaders do, that's probably only about 50% or less of what needs to be done, and the responsibility ultimately comes back on each of us. And I think Gene gave a very good presentation on that. Thanks.
I guess I'm the last one standing. No one else wants to say anything. I think Gene did a great job here tonight. I got to applaud for that. My background, I was a chairman for a labor union for 20 years in Chicago. And I worked in the railroad industry 47 years. I represented conductors, brakemen, switchmen, everything on the Northwestern and the Union Pacific out of Chicago. I was the state director of Illinois for a little while. So I've got a background in labor, but I also negotiated a 6-hour workday, which taught me a few things. I found out that people, you don't need a full lunch break if you only work 6 hours, and you don't gain 2 hours leisure time. You lost it in traffic, you get it back. So I think that if you look at our society today, through automation and different things that are happening, that one of the solutions to our problem worldwide is to shorten the workday, because machines replace people and machines don't pay taxes, people do. And we're constantly replacing people with machines, and machines don't pay taxes. That's one of our problems. Amen. And there's a huge amount of what they call I can't think of the word, universal intelligence.
AI?
What is it?
Artificial
Artificial intelligence. There's a huge amount waiting to be implemented, And businesses don't want to implement it yet. They don't want to cause too much of a drastic loss of jobs overnight, but it's there. And another problem is that we have unions asking for wage increases, and we have corporations packing up and leaving the country because they don't want to pay the wage increases. They go somewhere else where it's cheaper, and they've got labor caught down. And then you have another problem, that is the members of the unions start to lose faith in their union because they're not getting the results that they need to get. So the end result is the number of unions that are around are less and less and less. And you haven't heard too many unions make any big strides lately. That's part of the reason why. So I think that we need a multifaceted thing we have to look at. Number one, we need to shorten the workday in this country to put more people back to work. We'll have more people working paying taxes. We'll have less people not working draining taxes. The government will get a twofold benefit of increased tax revenue without raising taxes. And less bills to pay for people aren't working as they'll be working. That's a positive thing. But then there's another problem. We have corporations leaving the country to go where labor costs are cheaper, which will accelerate if we did that. So we need to put tariffs on those corporations that leave the country, our American corporations that go overseas, so if they don't want to pay the tariffs, they can produce here. At least you have the jobs here, and because we have to. It could be an amendment to the antitrust laws. That's prevented it years ago, but they didn't have corporations leaving the country like they do now. So this would solve that problem. Then we have another problem, that is we have the best Congress money can buy. I've said that before, and this is one of our biggest problems. And in order to change that, I think that England they only have 60 days, or what is it, 2 months for
About
elections? 2 months. Well, if we change I think we need free airtime in this country in the last 60 days of a general election. That's from Labor Day to Election Day. And if you had free airtime, the challenger would have a chance against the incumbent because he'd get free airtime too. And the incumbent will vote for it because why? Because there's no history really of a challenger getting defeated by an incumbent in a general election. And number two, they get to keep the money they raise and they get free airtime. So the greed is too strong to vote for it. And once they put it in place, then some challengers will beat some incumbents. And when that happens, everything will change. You'll have Congress will represent the people who do the electing instead of representing the people buying their vote in Washington. Then you can put tariffs on corporations. Then you can shorten the workday. That to me is the direction to go in. I better shut up while I'm ahead. I'm going to give this back to our speaker.
Tom always brings up a 6-hour day. He's always right. The unions used to, from 1935 to 1957, it was in every convention of my union, the Auto Workers Union, to change the working hours to 30 for 40 with no cut in pay. 30 hours instead of 40 hours, but to make the same money that you used to make with 40 hours. It was always there until 1957, and I just sort of forgot about it. And frankly, I think that was one of the biggest mistakes they ever made in history. They should have listened to Tom. They should be listening to Tom today. Corporations are leaving the country. From the corporate point of view, globalization worked great. I don't think they really felt comfortable until the Soviet Union was overthrown, because there were every time they might start a factory in some country like Uganda, or someplace, and then next thing you know there would be a revolution. They get nationalized. So they weren't too crazy to leave the United States as long as the Soviet Union was over there helping with this or that third world country. But after that, as soon as the Soviet Union went away, they have been outsourcing jobs like crazy and going overseas like crazy. The auto workers contract is up September the 14th, and I'm worried sick about it because the school teachers showed us how to win. They showed us in West Virginia, and then in Oklahoma, and then in Arizona how to win. And the secret is to start early, work really hard, get a lot of friends on your side, and then go on strike. And my union's not doing that, and September the 14th is upon us, less than a month away, and their most critical contract is with the auto companies, and the expiration is September 14th. So I've been trying to figure out what I could do, but they won't even talk to me about it. I couldn't even get an appointment with the local union president over in Arlington. So that's a mistake they're making. I took notes on what people said. First speaker mentioned that racism was largely overcome in the unions, and that was largely because of my union, the Auto Workers Union. The AFL really was pretty racist. They supported the Chinese Exclusion Act, and then after that they allowed unions to be segregated. You'd have a black dock workers and white dock workers. You have two different unions on the same dock. And when the CIO was begun in 1935, they said, no, we're going to organize everybody of any race and any gender. So overcoming racism and sexism took a gigantic leap forward when the CIO was begun. And even today, in my union, you can get somebody fired for racism or even for sexism. And we talk all the time about women's right to get equal pay. Well, in the union movement, they largely do. So it's too bad we don't have more unions. The question was raised whether or not we actually need unions. And of course we do, because there really is a them and an us. The them is the employers and the us is the employees. It's nearly all of us are employees, but the them is our employers, and we have different interests. I certainly agreed with John who brought up economic democracy. We have a certain amount of democracy in America, but it's always been limited. And today we get the choice between fiddly-dee and one party and fiddly-dum in the other, pretty much. And so people have just quit voting. A lot of young people just don't vote. Obama stirred them up in 2008. A lot of young people turned out, and it was really unprecedented, really very good. But by 2014 or 2012, they weren't even that crazy about Obama because they didn't see the changes that they wanted, and young people didn't turn out as well. Is there a shortage of workers? We see that in the paper every day. There's a shortage of workers. I used to be on the workforce board here in Dallas, and people would come all the time and they'd say, we're short of workers. We're really short of workers. We've got to have more workers over there at my hotel or over there at my small business or my whatever it was. And they wanted the Workforce Commission to train workers for them and send them to community college or something and get them trained to do whatever it is that they wanted done. And they would always talk about a shortage of workers, but there's not a shortage of anything unless the price goes up. And when the price goes up, then you know there's a shortage. If it's toilet paper and there's a shortage, the price is going to go up. The price will go up for whatever there's a shortage of. And there is a little bit of pressure on price, on wages. They are coming up a little bit. And but when considering over time, it's really not that much. I think I have a statistic here somewhere that says that in the same period that CEO pay went up 940%, worker pay went up 12%. That was over many years. It wasn't just a couple of days. But wages have largely been stagnant. I missed a couple of quotes that I should have thrown in. Noam Chomsky, who's somebody I don't like. This is a quote from him, though.
Amen.
I like his quote. His quote, he said, the Republican Party is the most dangerous organization in human history. And Michael Moore, somebody I like a lot more, he says that Donald Trump has just begun the extinction of human life on Earth. But getting back to your comments, some Some of the books that were mentioned I'm not familiar with, so I don't know. The tax refund. Republicans generally consider a tax cut to be, what we need to help the economy. This came from a guy named Laffer.
Arthur Laffer.
They should have, when they looked at his name, they should have known something was fishy. But he came up with the idea that if you give rich people money, it will make poor people happy. And Mr. Reagan bought into that, and Mr. Trump bought into that, and they've been selling that to the American people ever since then. If you give rich people money, it will make the poor people happy. And it's certainly working for the rich people. But the tax refund, the $1 trillion tax refund, the most recent one, nearly all went into stock buybacks. It did not go to creating jobs. They just took the stock that they had sold to people and bought it back so that the price would go up and all the stockholders would have a lot more money. And since the board of directors had most of the stock, it was just giving it to themselves. So they did that. On immigration, the union position on immigration is not whether they should do this or they should do that. Their position is what we do. And their position, because of that, is that we should organize them. We should ask the government to do something. The government belongs to the rich. It doesn't belong to us. And even though we might be able to get some things out of them, we have to do it with pressure, not with out of the goodness of their hearts. So just directly on Cesar Chavez, there was a period of time in his time when he opposed immigration. I don't know for sure why he did it, but I think it was because he was trying to get into the AFL-CIO. And the AFL-CIO at that time opposed immigration. And somehow he did get into the AFL-CIO, and somehow he changed his position and said we've got to organize the immigrants, which is exactly what the union said, and it's frankly the only thing that's going to work.
Yeah, I agree.
Let's see. I wish you'd have said a little more about petrodollars, John. I didn't know that was over.
It's not being reported, and
Yeah.
you can notice it by.
I agree with you that the news media is not what it should be. And I heard a quote from somebody that we have left, the era of truth has been left behind. I thought maybe that's overstated, but I thought it was pretty cool.
Right on.
And I think I tend to agree with people who say that the voting system is not as good as it should be. And whether you're talking about voting machines or gerrymandering or voter suppression in general, I think it's not as good as it should be. And that goes to exactly what I said, that we don't control the apparatus of voting. The government does, and the government it's their government. And so for us to say we want better voting laws is the right thing, and we should be working toward that, but it's kind of an uphill. Whereas I'm a lot more interested in the general strike. The industrial workers of the world, that was their only strategy. That's where they made their mistake. They only had one strategy. And that was that they were going to organize all the workers, and then they were going to take them all on strike, and then that was going to be a revolution. They weren't really a union. They were revolutionaries. And their only way of conducting the revolution was to try to get a general strike going. And they weren't at all interested in voting, and I think that was a terrible mistake. We have to fight on every front. Everything that's been brought up here, every injustice that we know about, racism, sexism, homophobia, we have to fight on every one of those things because they're all part of our democracy. And the thing that I like the best about the discussion, of every one of you who took the mic, you didn't disagree that there's a global crisis. And you didn't disagree that the answer is more democracy. Thank you.
Well, that's it for tonight. They kick us out of here at 10:30. Our speaker's still here if you want to talk to him, and so hope to see y'all next week. Not next week, 2 weeks from now. Next week.
2 weeks time. If an elephant shows up at the Labor Day breakfast,